dear listeners, and welcome to the next series, the next episode of our series of our podcast, Inovācijas, veselībā. And this episode is a special one because today this is being recorded during a conference which is called Vision in Actions, Value and Innovation-Based Healthcare, which is happening right here in Riga, Latvia. And just a quick reminder that the purpose of this series is to look at healthcare innovation issues and topics in a way that resonates probably with the general public or those people who are maybe less fluent in healthcare, but still very much affected by it and interested in it. And today my guest is Mr. Thomas Allvin, who is the European Federation of Pharmaceuticals Industries and Associations Executive Director for Strategy and Healthcare. Hello, Thomas.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. Before we begin and dive into the topic today, which is probably innovations in healthcare in a larger perspective, which is the EU perspective, and just also dabbing a bit into what is Latvia's place here, since we are here in Latvia, then probably our listeners are very much also interested in your perspective, maybe more so from the outside, how you see us. But just a quick technical reminder that you can listen and see us on our channels on Spotify, on YouTube, and on Facebook by looking for the profile called Inovācijas, veselībā. So, Thomas, my first question is probably very technical, but just to get a scope of where we are at the European Union level. So, what would you say are the main barriers right now that may hinder innovation in healthcare, and where the EU has been, for example, supportive in innovation, and where still some improvements could be made?
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for this question, and great to be here at this conference. Obviously a very complicated question, but innovation depends on a full ecosystem of different actors all doing their part. And of course, part of this is a public ecosystem. The public authorities fund basic research that is performed in universities, academic hospitals, research centers, and that hopefully make new discoveries that someday in the future can become a new medicine or a new health technology. But then there's of course this whole network on the private side with small companies, larger pharmaceutical companies. And all these players needs to be there and have a sustainable environment to act. And often many of the early research in universities and hospitals are picked up by smaller companies who try to develop them and see, can we make a product out of this? Because most of the basic research doesn't pan out in real life, because when you test it in human beings, it actually doesn't work. It looks great on paper, but it actually doesn't work. So you need someone who invests money to test it. And then usually at the later stage, bigger companies come in and pour more money in it to be able to do the big clinical trial studies with thousands of people that are usually needed to really test if a new medical innovation works. So it's a big ecosystem. And of course, all of these players need access to data, which is really what the innovative industry, what we are doing. We're generating data on clinical and patient outcomes of new technologies. So you need the good sources for that data. So I would say that in Europe, in general, we are quite good at the basic research. We have good science, good basic research. We are not always as successful in translating that into actual products or services. And so there's some parts of the ecosystem that could be improved. For instance, small companies usually have difficulty finding funding because they need funds from venture capitalists or otherwhere where they can fund their part of the chain. But many times, unfortunately, this happens instead across the Atlantic in the US, where it's easier to raise money, and there are ecosystems, in Boston and other places where all these actors already interact. So, I mean, we're doing good, but we could do better, because we used to be the number one in the world on research and innovation, and we are not number one anymore if you see to the numbers.
So we have to raise our competitiveness on a global scale, probably. So we're talking about all those fancy things like healthcare ecosystems and innovations and et cetera, but just thinking about our listener and the basic human being and the patient actually, right now or in the future, at some point we will all be patients, right? So what is my benefit as a patient from creating these ecosystems and giving funds to innovation and investing in healthcare? So me as a patient, what do I get out of it?
Yeah, well, first of all, this research that happens at the later stages, it's clinical trials when you test maybe a new innovative cancer medicine, and you test it in real patients and compare it maybe to the current standard of care. So sometimes for some patient groups, these clinical trials are the first and maybe the only possibility to get access to a new innovative method when everything else has failed. So for some patient groups, that can be really important to be included in the clinical trial to try to test something when the standard of care doesn't work anymore. So the more clinical research we do in Europe, the more of these possibilities you will have, and then also when the health systems, because of course it's hospitals and clinics that are involved in the clinical research, and when they have been doing the clinical research, they also get easier to adopt the final medicine that is approved. So usually where you have clinical research, you have early access to the new medicines once they are approved by the European Medicines Agency and get out in real clinical practice. So there's a lot of benefit for patients. So research and access to medicines, they follow each other.
Yeah, and it's a very tangible benefit, right? Because access to medicines and their pricing is, I think, a sore point, not only in Latvia, but I guess in the European Union as a whole. And maybe let's talk a bit about that, because yes, one of the issues, and we'll talk about the case of Latvia at the end of our conversation, but one of the issues is the accessibility of medicine and the cost of drugs for more specific conditions especially. So where do you see, what are the main reasons why this is still a challenge? I guess, investments and innovations that are not happening maybe as much in Europe as in other parts of the world probably is one of the reasons, right? Why we have, we also have actually, discrepancies between the price of medicines in different EU countries. That's also a sore point.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when it comes to access to medicines, I mean, it's again quite complicated. But as you say, there are big inequalities between European countries in terms of how soon you get access to a medicine and how many medicines are available of all that are, approved by the European Medicines Agency. Most of these factors are national. It can be linked to the pricing and reimbursement process. Sometimes that takes a long time. Of course, in some countries, there are a lot of delays in this process because there's not enough resources. Sometimes you have discussions on the evidence requirements. So obviously, when the national payer or pricing or reimbursement agency, they want evidence that this new medicine is worth paying for. So the pharmaceutical company submits data to show what the medicine is doing. And sometimes different countries have different requirements for what kind of evidence they want, and they want to compare it to the standard of care in their country. And this differs between different countries. So sometimes the company needs to develop new data for each and every country. And of course, can take a lot of time. And then, of course, you have the pricing discussion. And as you say, we should have a system where we believe where the prices of medicines can vary depending on the country's ability to pay, because not all countries have the same type of budgets and the same amount of money per capita on healthcare. And while that is still the case, of course there will be a leveling there, but while this is still the case, there should be possibility to vary the prices. But there are challenges in this because many countries like to use other countries' prices as a reference for their own prices. And so that can sort of undermine that system. So if very rich countries tag less resourced countries, their prices, then you get spillover effects that kind of undermines this possibility to have different prices. You also, of course, have parallel trade, where parallel traders can buy medicines in a country where it's cheaper and sell in another country. So, but this is why we need to discuss this all together. And EFPIA, we have put forward a concept for how what we call equity-based tier pricing would work. So equity, because we want equality, and tiered pricing. So you have different tiers of pricing in Europe. But this we need to discuss with all the member states and the European Commission, because there needs to be an agreement, sort of a joint rules that we all have to play by and respect. So this also comes down to solidarity between the member states to have such a system.
Do you feel like there is, is there a sense of solidarity? Do you see that there is political will to discuss and to come to some sort of compromise or conclusion on this question?
Well, that is a good question. I think there's certainly on the political agenda that we need more equal access to medicines. The question is how we do it. So if the solidarity is there, I think that remains to be seen. I think that the European Commission has recently launched a revision of the EU pharmaceutical legislation. So it's a huge once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to remake the rules of how we approve medicines. And in that proposal, one of their objectives is to try to get more equal access, but unfortunately they go about this in what we feel is the wrong way, by lowering the protection periods for innovative medicines. And of course it's the protection periods, the patents, but also what we call regulatory data protection that protects the data that the industry generates. The protection of that for a certain time allows the industry to make a return on the investment, so you can invest in new research and development. That's how the system works. And when the Commission now proposes to reduce those times in order to bring generic medicines earlier on the market, and of course they are cheaper, you undermine the R&D ecosystem that we were just talking about. So we think that this is the wrong way to try to solve this. Instead, we need to work in new type of pricing models. We need to discuss equity-based tier pricing, and we need to look at the actual root causes of access delays in the different countries. That's of course more complicated, but that's what we need to deal with. And I think conferences like this and other types of roundtables is how we need to go about it.
Yeah, exactly. Just also speaking from personal perspective, I have a colleague of mine who has to use a certain type of drug very regularly, and she came to me with the question, well, Elīna, why is this drug X much cheaper, for example, in Lithuania than in Latvia? And then I couldn't answer her that. I said, well, no, national interest and etc. etc. And then she said, well, I have a friend who can get the same drug from Ukraine, for example, and produced outside of the European Union. So this is another actually issue, because what I said to her is, okay, a drug that is produced for the European Union or outside the European Union, it has undergone certain, procedures that you can be assured that this drug will not harm you. How do you know, the effectiveness, which is the lesser, I think, even concern, or even the harm that it could come to you when using cheaper drugs, much cheaper, which sort of have the same, benefits and the same contents and everything. So this is another question, actually, that it's a risk to public health, actually, that we don't have the access to cheaper medicine that is effective, and that's why we as people are looking for alternative ways to get the drugs.
Yeah, absolutely, and of course there are risks with falsified medicines, and there is a system in the EU to monitor that all the medicines that are dispensed in pharmacies are the real thing from the real manufacturing. But as you say, we have very strict quality and safety controls for manufacturing in Europe or in all factories around the world that supply the European market. And of course this also goes for generic medicines that are sold in Europe. So of course if they are sold through the real supply chains, they are perfectly safe. But so this is absolutely true, and but also shows why we need to keep research and development in Europe and have a good regulatory system, because we want safe and high quality medicines, but also that the price of the medicine in every country is decided it's a negotiation between the pharma company and the authorities in that country, and they decide on the price, and the authorities decide if they want to reimburse it. And of course it's also a question on how much do the patients need to pay. Sometimes the patient has to pay their own part, and of course it's of course a role of the public sector to have universal health care and make sure that people can get access to health care without having to pay too much out of their own pockets. So of course if that's the case, that a medicine is not available in the country or it's too expensive for the patient, then you also need to invest more in healthcare, and some European countries don't invest enough in healthcare and is sort of below the European average.
Yeah, well that probably leads us to my last question, since we are in the beautiful wintry Riga in Latvia, and probably the majority of our listeners will be Latvian based. So your perspective from the outside, how does Latvia look on, the larger map of the EU regarding healthcare innovations and healthcare actually in general, if you can say a couple words about that? Because we always as people get the feeling or the sense that the grass is always greener on the other side, and probably nobody else has the same challenges and the problems on that scale as we do. We are the poorest, the most challenged, etc., etc. What would you say to that?
No, well, I would say that obviously there are challenges, and I think we heard some of them in the conference earlier on life expectancy and some chronic diseases, and of course this is and I think the health minister put it well, the need to invest more in primary care and get the primary care services really comprehensive, so that patients can get early help with diseases, because often early intervention and prevention is good for the patient, and it also saves money for the system because you avoid very costly complications later on. But I think there's also a lot of opportunities, and I think one opportunity is certainly that you're a quite small country in the European perspective, and sometimes that is good when it comes to implementing new systems. And for instance, one of the key resources that we talked about is health data. How do we digitalize the system and get registries, etc., and health data that measure health outcomes of patients. And usually this can sometimes be easier for some countries to do almost from scratch, and you implement one system in the entire country. A country like, let's say, Germany is of course, higher GDP and all this. But of course, they have a lot of legacy systems that is already there, and they have a fragmented with a different lender, which makes it difficult for the interoperability of data between different parts. So sometimes it can be easier for a smaller, more, let's say, unified country to quicker leapfrog and implement a new system. I think, Estonia has been successful in that. So it shows that in the end it is not necessarily about the size or the GDP of a country, but just having the right mindset and dare to implement and invest, because of course you need to do some investments to get there. But with the right type of investments, it's all kinds of opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. And on this positive note, I thank you for the conversation. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us. Just a reminder that this was the podcast Inovācijas, veselībā. My name is Elīna Vrobļevska, and my guest today was Mr. Thomas Allvin. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned.